Hey there. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let's talk about non-code contributions. I'm really excited. So first off, hi, I'm Ramón. I'm living in Vienna in Austria, and I've been developing software for 12 years. I'm more recently in developer relations, and community has been a big part of that for me. Being able to learn from other people and teach other people has been vital to my career, and I'm so thankful for that. And a lot of that came from open source, and I want to share a little bit of my history with open source because it didn't start with coding, and actually to this day it doesn't involve that much coding. I started out volunteering at Rails Girls workshops. If you're not familiar with them, they're workshops to get folks, especially underrepresented folks, to get into software development via Ruby on Rails, doing a Ruby on Rails tutorial, and it's a lot of fun. I love these events. And, I was, coaching at these and just contributing a little bit to the tutorials. And I, through that, discovered a group called the Rails Girls Summer of Code, where again I started volunteering as a coach. This was to help folks this was crowdfunding to get folks into open source software development through a stipend, which was really cool. And again, after some time, I started becoming a core member of the team, and this was probably some of my finest work, and I'm so happy about it. Sadly, the organization no longer exists, but it was incredible. And today, I'm helping out at Distribute Aid. We're doing some logistics for helping folks do humanitarian aid around the world. It's really incredible, and I get to do some live streaming, some coding, some mentorship. It's great. And you might be thinking, yeah, there's not a lot of code going on there. So how do we think about what contributing is? Because there's a lot of assumptions there, aren't there? You think of contributing to open source, you think about, what you see here in this picture, some GitHub dots, some GitHub squares, and you think about, contributing code, you think about commits, you think of, here's me doing some commits to a React project, and these can be small projects, so your own projects, some hobby projects, that may be big projects. They can be huge projects like free code camps, one of the largest learning resources and super open source. And I've made one contribution to that. It was a documentation contribution. We'll get to documentation. And there's a ton of possibilities there. And that's what I want to cover today. We're going to be talking about non-code contributions. So let's try and define these. I'm not going to use a dictionary. Let's use just any old definition that I pulled. Any contributions that don't involve writing code. Right. And what I really want to touch on today is how incredible these are. They're so vital to the life of a open source project and the community around it that I really recommend, even though you write lots of code, that you totally do it. And you might be thinking, well, if I write code, can't I just contribute code to that project? And you totally can, and to come back to the title of this talk, there's more to open source than code. If we think of an open source project, right? We've got a box there. Sorry, I'm not a very good illustrator. We got our box there with a code on it. And I find that to this box, there are more sides, right? You've got your community around this open source project. But not just that, you've got where the context where this open source project lives in the wider ecosystem and how that relates to the others, how the community of this open source project relates to others. So this is something that's really important for an open source project to thrive. And you might be thinking, okay, but still, I could just contribute code, couldn't I? And yes, but here's some reasons why. And a lot of these involve, they're personal for me. And I'm going to start with what the biggest one for me was. You see, I'm a shy person. And getting to do things like helping out others, facilitating events, and this sort of thing helped me get to know people and feel more comfortable in my code. Code is intimidating to me to this day. Big time imposter syndrome here, and that's okay. I work on it, and being able to interact with folks has been really helpful for me. It also helps a project thrive. There's so many moving parts to an open source project that go beyond the code that being able to do these things is really helpful for it. And there's also a bit of a self-motivation there too, something that we want out of it, some kind of reward. And I think, meeting people, as I was talking about being shy, right? Meeting people, maybe meeting some of the maintainers, maybe meeting some of the people you look up to in these communities is a great motivator for getting into non-code contributions. And one of my favorite ones is making it a better place for everybody, contributing to this project even easier for the person that comes after you. That's something so important. So the main bulk of this talk is going to cover what are the types of non-code contributions we can do. And I touched on one of them already, so we're going to get right to it. Documentation. And some of you probably already thought, yeah, we're going to talk about documentation. Of course we are. And, this can cover a README. Here's an example from DistributeAid, showing how to get the project up and running, finding some common troubleshooting issues. And that doesn't have to be a README, of course. This can be its own thing, its own repository, its own website, like FreeCodeCamp has here, a big guide for contributing to FreeCodeCamp. Fun fact, the way I was able to contribute to FreeCodeCamp was by finding a typo when I was live streaming. I was reading out loud and I kind of stumbled, I kind of tripped over a typo, and it was a fascinating experience. But yeah, absolutely fine to do. And when it comes to writing, blogging plays a huge part of that as well. And yes, you're not contributing directly to that repository of that open source project. But I would argue that here's for example, a really old blog post of mine where I talk about, I have a tutorial here for making a Ruby on Rails app, and this fits into the wider Ruby on Rails ecosystem. This helped some folks. I got some emails about it. It was, helpful for the project to thrive. And when you're working with that project, trying it out, this is like a step one, right? Like maybe you have an unconventional computer setup. Maybe you're running an operating system that the maintainers didn't use or expect somebody to use. And you came into it, stumbled upon an error. Here's a Docker error you see here. Being able to report that and creating an issue and being like, hey, this is something I found is really helpful for the maintainers. So speaking of issues, let's talk about issue triage. This is something that has been commonly said to take up the vast majority of maintainers' time. So if you can help mitigate that for them so that they can focus on fixing code and communicating and all of that is something really important. And if you're not familiar with the concept, this is just taking open source issues from a GitHub from a repository and assigning them tags, helping assign people, maybe closing duplicate issues. And you're probably thinking, well, I just can't go in there and start doing this, right? And what some folks do, like Kubernetes does here, they have a guide on issue triage. How cool is this to help folks get into it and start, helping triage issues? I think it's great. And, to an issue, there's going to be PRs as well, pull requests, and how cool it is to be able to come in and read those pull requests and maybe give some feedback here and there, asking questions. Here's a screenshot of a pull request of mine. Taking a look at this and giving some feedback and asking those questions is something really important to help not only the contributor, have a conversation, help them improve, help yourself improve, but also help improve the code of the project. And it's not just asking questions, is it? It's also, spoiler, I spoiled myself, answering questions. How cool it is that we can go on website. And when it comes to asking and answering questions, let's talk about Stack Overflow. Here's another Docker error that got answered. How vital it is to provide a place outside of that repository where folks can ask questions, have them answered, and when looking them up later, they can find those answers and help maintainers find common pain points that they can then bring into like a frequently asked questions section on their documentation. And it's not just all on the internet, of course, unless we're talking about online events as well, but especially when it was easier to go to in-person events, how cool it is to be able to facilitate these, to volunteer and do things like, here's this picture from one of my favorite conferences, RoarJS, where you can do things like help with an info desk, help usher folks to talks, help with wiring up speakers. That's something I've done a lot in my time. How cool it is. When it comes to those resources, to be able to translate them into other languages. I speak Spanish, English, and German myself. I can, help localize those things and, of course, do the best I can to be able to help other folks have access to those resources and expand the community. How cool is that? And of course, if you've been going to these events for a while, why not start hosting them? I'll tell you what, I actually started going to the Vienna Ruby meetup, and after a time, you can see in this screenshot, I started help organize it, and it was so rewarding to be able to keep that community going and keep it alive. And of course, events can also involve hackathons where you have folks come in and contribute to open source or create projects on the like in that time. Something we did a lot of Distribute8 is go to things like ensemble programming events where you have loads of folks at one time. You have a driver, a navigator, and an ensemble working at the same time, helping each other. I find this really, really rewarding and helpful. Creating assets is totally a way you can help as well. It's something I'm not very good at, but I still try. I create assets so that they can sort of nudge an idea in the right direction, get a conversation going. Giving talks is what I'm doing right now, right? You can totally give talks on an open source project of your choice and help spread awareness of that open source project. When these get recorded, of course, they turn into video content. And this is something you can do as well. Not just, creating live videos for YouTube or something, but also live streaming. How cool is that? Okay, so in this picture, I'm wearing a sailor outfit because I'm being onboarded onto an open source project. This was something we did last year. Super fun. And again, help combine community, spread awareness. Again, when it comes to spreading that message, you can totally volunteer to do social media for that project. Help folks keep up to date with what's going on, spread, help repost resources that folks have made. And if you want, you can even create your curated list of this, be it a website dedicated to the latest resources or even a mailing list. One of my favorites is This Week in Rust, where every week you get a digest of what's been going on in the Rust project. Talks, job openings, events, fantastic. Articles, of course. Big projects, they need project coordination. You can help out with doing things like picking out a set of issues that need taking care of, maybe planning out a sprint if they do that, maybe help run meetings where folks get together and talk about what's going on in the project. You can volunteer to do something like moderation, making sure that community is inclusive and safe. For example, here's an example from the Electron.js community, right? Where they have a Discord which is a chat server where folks can get together and talk about Electron.js. And something you could do, for example, is go to one of these and be like, hey, I'd love to be able to make sure that code of conduct is indeed enforced. And finally, mentorship. Mentorship is one of my favorite topics, and I think empowering folks to be able to contribute to your open source project is absolutely a way you can do this, and just be like, hey, do you want to pair on this issue to somebody who's interested? I think is really powerful. So say you're maintaining your own open source project, you're writing the code for it. The question comes, what can we do to help facilitate the need for the doing of these non-code contributions? And one thing you can do is establish from the start that inclusive community. Have an enforced strategic code of conduct, have moderation, have a governance model, do things like creating issue structures that facilitate that triage. So you can set up infrastructure for folks, for example, who want to contribute via a content management system or CMS, something like this to make it easier on folks to be able to get up and running with contributing to your project. And you can be an advocate. Just like that's something I do in my spare time, is I'm a developer advocate for Distribute8, for example. And when I'm doing something like this, I want to just share some action items that I go through when I'm looking at a project to be able to contribute to. And it's very similar to contributing to code. It's things like identifying problems, mapping out solutions, proposing these solutions/problems, identifying ways that we can circle back and make that smoother the next time. And of course, most important is to continue practicing that open source etiquette. Before I go, I just want to share some resources. There's Kubernetes guide. There's some more great resources out there on making non-code contributions. And I have a book at the very bottom. Working in Public by Nadia Egbal is phenomenal. Now, folks, I've been talking a lot now, but I want to hear from you too. Maybe I missed something, or maybe you have some ideas of how you do non-code contributions. Please get in touch. I'm on Twitter at HolaSoyMilk. But all that said, thank you very much. And enjoy your day.